Many years ago, my family was getting back from vacation, and when we got home, my brother took the car and headed out with his girlfriend. Since we had just gotten home from a long trip, my mother decided to do a load of laundry. She began heading upstairs with a small basket of clothes, and as she left the laundry room, she saw a tall, dark figure standing at the end of the hallway. Terrified, she ran upstairs, and as soon as she reached the top step, she got a call. My brother had gotten into an accident, and the ambulance was on the way. A few days later, after surgery and some recovery, my brother and his girlfriend were talking to us about what happened, and he said, "Mom, I saw you at the crash." Confused, my mom asked what he meant. He said, "Mom, I saw you at the end of the hallway. You had the laundry basket in your hands." The night my brother crashed, he rolled his car down a hill and blacked out for a moment with a concussion. He crawled out of the car, his girlfriend ran to him and hugged him. He didn't remember where he was till he heard the ambulance heading down the road. As he turned his head to look at it, his already broken neck gave out, and he was resuscitated at the scene. He was dead for almost a full minute. At that time, he went home and saw my mom describing the clothes, the hair, and the laundry she was holding. It was insane. He made a full recovery and hasn't crashed a car since. It was the night of a party of some sort, and my sisters had a few friends over. We were all getting them ready to go out. We were in the hall bathroom, and my sister's room, which had a full mirror, was directly across the hall from the bathroom. Suddenly, my sister's friend glanced down the hallway and saw an older woman in an old-fashioned black dress, with a tight grey bun on top of her head. The reflection of the woman sitting at our dining room table was so clear, she got curious as to who it was. So she walked down the hallway and looked into the kitchen to see no one. All the chairs were empty, except a coat hanging across the back of a chair. She got all of our attention, and from the end of the hall, we looked into the TV's reflection, and we tried to figure out if the shape was just from the coat. That's when we saw her head move, and we all screamed. Our mother ran out of her room, and we explained what was happening. She looked down the hall, and she too saw the woman. She walked into the kitchen with caution, and we directed her towards the woman in the reflection. Very carefully, she inched closer till her hand was inches away. Carefully, she grabbed on. But before she could even push the chair, the figure had disappeared, leaving an empty space in the reflection. There was no possible way that the figure was the same coat that we now could see clearly. We all were so scared from that point that we all finished getting ready in my sister's room. We turned the TV around, and the next day, we moved the TV to a different place in the room. We didn't want to risk seeing her again if we were alone and freaking ourselves out. This woman became popular at our home, and there are many other stories involving her. She's known as Gertrude to us, the lonely lady in black. When I was little, I was constantly being bullied by others because I was different. It was both physical and mental bullying by kids, teachers, adults around me, and my siblings. It got so bad that I tried to kill myself at 8 years old. I had two friends, and even they were distant towards me when others were around. At 6 years old, I began to be alone all the time, and I began hearing voices and seeing people who became my friends. My parents, assuming I had created imaginary friends to cope with being alone, went along with it. In the middle of summer, I had gotten very close with my friend, and we had played many games together and spoken about things going on. And that was when things began to get weird. She had started to talk to me about things that hadn't happened yet. Coming to me in the middle of the night, opening my closet door while everyone slept and sat on the edge of my bed. I shared a bunk bed with my sister, and she always slept on the top bunk. She never woke up any time she came to the room, no matter how loud we were. After talking to her for a while, She began to talk to me about how my mom was going to fall down the stairs, or my brother would break a bone, or that my plate would shatter and cut someone, and it got scary. I would tell people to be careful so as to avoid these things, but no one took me seriously, and they would still get hurt. One day, she told me she needed me to do something for her. She needed me to lead her with my body, and she touched me for the first time. Her skin was hot and cold at the same time. If I felt like she had burnt me, then put ice over it, and then sent shivers down my body, causing me to become temporarily paralyzed, and I screamed, waking my parents up and causing her to run into the dark closet to disappear. And that's when I began to tell my family about her nightly visits and the things she would tell me and how she touched me. My mother decided to call a medium. Without telling the woman a single thing, she immediately came to me and asked me about things she should not have known about, and began telling me to tell the girl that she was not allowed to be here, and that I don't give her permission to be in my house and be near us, and I wasn't her friend and she needed to leave. And I did, that night. She came to my room and told me how angry she was, that I told everyone about her, and that she was supposed to be a secret. And that's when I told her I didn't want her around, and that she was scaring me and I needed her to leave and never come back. And she laughed at me, giving me chills and leaving an eerie feeling. She walked up to my face and said, "Fine, I will leave." And she grew tall, and as she walked into the closet darkness, swallowed the whole doorway, and slowly receded till it was back to normal. For the first time in months, I slept great and wasn't scared. I felt relieved. For a week or so, everything went great, until one night I got up to go to the bathroom. Walking into the hallway, I found that the bathroom light didn't turn on. Headed back to my room, I found the door closed and locked along with the other rooms in the hallway. I looked back and I saw a dark shape move in the bathroom, and dread took over my body. I began to panic, pounding on the doors in the hall but getting no answer. Trying to open the doors and staring straight ahead, fearing that I would see shadows if I turned around. And after a while, I gave up, sinking down to the floor and placing my head on my knees. I began to hear whispers, echoing from the hall. I peeked up and looked around and saw a dark, looming figure peering down the hall, and slowly it stalked toward me. I screamed and buried my head into my knees once again, just waiting for the figure to get me. But it never did. Instead, I heard my brother's voice as he wrapped his arm around me. I looked up to see his face full of dread as he asked how long I was sitting there. I told him everything, and he gently knocked on my parents' bedroom door, waking them and telling them everything that had happened, and how he had heard me screaming as he was walking up the stairs to the kitchen and came running. For the next week, I slept in my parents' bedroom, and one night I was woken up to a slight creaking noise. Looking over, I saw the closet door opening, and then she appeared, and slowly walked over and leaned over me, pinning me down and paralyzing me. I couldn't scream, and I couldn't move. She sat over me as if waiting for the perfect moment, and that's when my mom moved next to me. And I got the chance to scream. It woke my mum up, and she looked over, she saw it. The thing I saw as a little girl was the dark figure from the hallway, and she was speechless. She was trying to wake my father as it slowly inched its face closer to mine, and finally he shot up, alerting it, and causing it to leave. Finally, I could move. It was over from there. I was then baptized, and we moved houses. Back in 1997, I was asked by my manager to help him move out of his mom's old house. I figured as long as I'm getting paid, no problem. I knew she had died, and him being the oldest son was taking care of her at the house. He was a man in his 50s, so his mother had been living in the house since the late 50s to 60s, by the look of the stuff. I was to bring out the stuff from the bedrooms into the large living room, and then he would tell me what went in the truck and what went in the garage. I would take out everything from the bedroom, then sort the closet. In every bedroom, I would do that. I would turn from the closet and step on something that had not been there before, like a toy car or rolling pin. There was a box in the living room next to the phone, and I could feel some very unwelcoming vibes coming from it. In the third bedroom, he wanted me to take the side tables the box was laying on in the garage. I did and asked where you want the box. He said just put it over there on the couch. He did and cleared the third bedroom on the way out of the closet. I looked around and didn't see anything to trip on. I carried 2 boxes and tripped on a broom that had been placed at the doorway out of room. This was his mom's room, and I fell flat on my face on top of the boxes because I did see it carrying the boxes. I had to now move the couch into the garage and put the box on the floor in front of the fireplace. I was almost done, and my manager was cleaning out the kitchen all this time. I was working fast now because the feeling of dread was getting to me. I had 1 closet left in the living room. When I turned with the box, I almost fell because I had stepped on a rotten banana on the floor behind me. I asked my manager, pretty angry at this point, if he had placed it there. He was a serious older man and was like, "You're kidding, right?" I was like, forget it. I was done. Took the last things into the garage and moving truck. I stopped and asked him where the box by the fireplace went. It was the last thing in the house. He said Mom goes in the garage. She left the house to my brother so he can take her. I picked it up, and sure enough, it was the LA corner marked Ashes and had a woman's name. I thought to myself, why you wanted me gone so badly? You probably don't know you're gone. I placed her in the garage and was very happy to be leaving. A year after high school, I went to spend the night at a friend's house. It was the first time I had thought I had visited a few times beforehand. We were going to drive somewhere early the next morning. He had in the past told me that his house was haunted, but I had never experienced something like that outside of my own home. After dinner with his family, we went into his backyard with his pit bull. It wasn't aggressive, but was somewhat trained to be, if needed, as a guard dog. As we sat in the yard, the dog began to sniff around his fence that was covered deeply with ivy. We both turned to look when it started to growl. Next thing we knew, the rather heavy dog flew back 10 feet or so and came running at us like a scared pup. We figured it was some kind of animal and the dog had jumped back. But the way it flew, I had my doubts. It was as if someone had thrown it back. But there was no scurrying or noise in the fence. We poked at the fence with broomsticks and nothing. The dog went in the house and would not come out. It was still light out, and my friend proceeded to tell me that things had been going on the past few months. His uncle had died, and there were strange things going on in the house. We opened the door to the garage where his uncle would stay when we lived there. It was summer in LA and quite warm, but in the garage you could see your breath, and the light would only go in a foot or two. We closed the door, and when it got late, I slept on the living room couch. That night, I awoke to the clear sound of boots walking up and down the hallway. I was freezing and figured it was best to keep my eyes closed. I felt inside that this was not a person. I drifted back to sleep eventually. In the morning, I told my friend and he said that was my uncle. He then told me how he had died. He had been arrested for being a bad drunk at a party and was fighting with everyone, including the police that came. He had hung himself in jail with shoelaces, despite the fact that he was wearing cowboy boots. This was not uncommon back then. People died in custody all the time. When his father got home, he told him, and that hard no bullshit man told me he had seen his nephew outside his window once, with a look on his face like he was pleading for forgiveness. This was the first paranormal experience I had outside my house. I never spent the night there again. I can't really say why I did this. I know it wasn't really for my health. After night classes at a tech school, my friend and I had time. We got out about 10, and in those years, this was early. He asked if there were any tracks open to jog in. Burbank was too far, and I told him I knew a place. I had been taken the year prior by a friend that liked local anomalies. I drove to the hills where the 210 and 118 meet. In the hills, maybe 15 minutes in there is a graveyard called Glen Haven. According to my other friend, the year prior, it was very haunted. It has no walls, and it's across the street from another graveyard that does have fencing. Down the road from it there is a gravity hill that pushes your car uphill. Down further there is a bar that had people that would chase you out if you were not their type of person. At the end of the way out, you bump a walkway that goes under the 210 freeway. Supposedly, someone was killed there and you can hear the screaming if you go to it in the middle of the night. The gravity hill is real. The bar is always closed when I've gone, and I heard the screaming at the walkway, but can see it being an echo. But the graveyard. Me and my friend walked out, and I told him we could run across and back for exercise. After some debate, I told him it was forced conditioning. We would be compelled not to stop until we got back. I did not know how right I was. By then, it was almost 11 PM and we started our run. I started to hear a little girl giggling. As we continued, because there were no lights in or around the graveyard, I could see what looked like fireflies. They're not native to Southern California, at least I've never seen them there. We started detecting movement by the time we reached the other side, and started running back almost in a panic. By this time, we could fully hear footsteps behind us, and both of us refused to turn around. When we jumped off the curb onto the road, it all stopped. The whole place went silent. It scared the hell out of us. On the way back, I said no one better chase us. I'm not in the mood. We did this once a week with the same results for a month. After that, we found something else to do that was less frightening. Being macho, we were like, that's boring. But we were really scared. I can admit that now. Early in my work repairing police cars, we had a strange few days. I was working in a huge repair facility, repairing police cars. We had a vehicle get towed in filled with blood and brains on the driver's seat and floor. They wanted us to drive it in, so we could remove bullets in the engine compartment. We refused to drive it in, and the policeman that worked there put plastic on the seat and drove it in. It took a few hours to dismantle the car until we found all the bullets. After that, they just left the car there in our shop. I inquired about moving it, but they said no, just leave it. We did get a story about it. The quick version is that a suspect bushed the officer on the floor, ran into the car and tried to run him down. The officer discharged his weapon and one round took him in the head. After they left, the vehicle almost pulsed with negative, angry energy. The whole mood of the shop was dark. At lunch, a motorcycle fell off the repair lift, something that hadn't happened before or since. An hour after that, a tow truck came out of a part as the RPM were running high because the PTO was being used. It ran in reverse for 150 yards through our large parking lot and hit a box truck at about 30 miles an hour, 15 feet from the motorcycle lift that had failed. The mood kept getting darker. At the end, the mechanics were asking if they could put religious candles around the car. I told them no, we can't have open flames in the shop. When the time came to close, it was just me and the later shift mechanic. When I walked the floor, the solvent tank's light bulbs were blinking throughout the shop. We were very uneasy, and as I approached the car in question, I could see flickering reflected on the window of the car next to it. In that reflection, I could see someone kneeling near the source of the flickering. I got angry and started yelling, "I told you guys, no candles." When I and the mechanic next to me turned the corner, there was nothing. No man, no candle, nothing. I told the mechanic, let's get the hell out of here, closed the shop and left. The car was there for 3 days with minor incidents, but mostly we stayed away from it. When they took the car, it was like night and day. When I first saw the movie Grudge, I thought to myself, yeah, I can see that happening. Enraged death can stain things. In the year and a half I was assigned to work at a police station in West Hollywood, I saw many strange things, but most of them are for different forums than this. I had contact with trustees, and they would talk briefly from time to time, but I was working for most of the day. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's basically prisoners that are non-violent and have small sentences that live in the station doing menial jobs. One day, one comes up to me and says that he could not sleep because there was thumping in the bathroom next to their dorm. I was like, most pipes, just deal with it. I went back to work. After the weekend, I saw him and he looked very tired. He told me that the thumping continued and he could hear gagging quietly. He went into the bathroom and no one was there and the noise stopped. The days would pass and now several of them were looking not rested. They said they can all hear it. I said, mention it to the person in charge of you. He told me that they did, and they threatened to get sent to regular prison if they kept bothering him. Sounded typical, but I was feeling kinda bad as they were looking kinda scared and tired. When I ran into the person in charge of them, he said that complaints came up every now and then, but there was nothing they could do. Everyone knew that 5 years prior, a trustee hung himself in that bathroom while everyone was sleeping. The problem would solve itself when the scared prisoners asked to be sent back to regular prison. There was nothing I could do, so I decided not to tell them because nothing good would come of it. They were all gone by the next week, and their replacement must have been heavy sleepers, because I didn't hear anything about it after that. Back in 1997, I lived in what I would call a bad neighborhood. It was in the San Fernando Valley, so it was not the worst LA had to offer. The apartment was under the stairs halfway to the back. The rent was cheaper than the other apartments, and I was glad to have gotten it. It was just me and my girlfriend at the time living there. What was odd off the bat was that I had 2 steps from the door to the floor of the apartment. I don't know why, and it was the only one. What it did do was make it cooler, almost all the time despite the outside temp. The kitchen and living room were open to each other and the door led to the bedroom. You could see 80% of the apartment from the bedroom. The first odd thing that happened was that at night, I could hear someone walking around outside my door and then knock. Sometimes I was in the living room and could clearly see no one was out there. A few weeks, the TV or radio would turn on, then the volume would go up. At the time, I figured that someone had similar electronics and that was causing it. It wasn't until a drawer came open in the kitchen and something fell on the floor late one night. It was my knife drawer, and the chef's knife was on the floor. I was in my bedroom and could see across the apartment, and no one had been there. I started asking the neighbours, but they mostly wanted to keep to themselves. The next night, I woke up to quiet sobbing that stopped when I went into the living room. The next day, I struck up a conversation with an older resident. I asked about my apartment, and he smiled. He told me a few years back there were some gang members that lived there. They used to make noise and trouble, and everyone stayed away from them. One day, they got in a fight in the apartment and stabbed someone to death. They just up and left him there, and it took a week or so to call the police when it started smelling. They couldn't get the smell out because it was in the subfloor. The solution was to tear it out and carpet and tile the cement under it. Looking at the rough cement 1 foot around the whole apartment, it made sense. He then told me there's more. I was like, great. The next people who lived there had a teenage daughter, and she had a boyfriend in the building. They broke up later, and he would watch her come and go with hate in his eyes. Luckily for him, he didn't hurt her physically, but what he did do was hang himself on the stairs just outside her door looking at it. He knew she left for work early, and of course she found him. Later I talked to the lady that lived in the apartment where her dead boyfriend lived, and she said she could hear someone opening her door, then walk down the walkway towards my apartment. I didn't renew my lease after a year of ghosts and the actually dangerous gang member that lived in these apartments. My family and I lived on post at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, for 8 years. The first house we lived in there was seriously haunted. Shortly after we moved in, the odd occurrences started. The first one I can remember was about 3 months or so after we moved in. Our youngest daughter was 2, and her toy box set was up in a hallway that ran from our dining room to the front door, with our stairs acting as a wall and separator from our living room. I was playing on my phone, and she was on the other side of the stairs playing with her toys. Suddenly, I hear her come running through the hallway and into the living room. When I looked up at her, there was no way to describe her other than terrified. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she ran as fast as she could to jump onto the couch with me. When I asked what was wrong, she pointed to the hallway and said, "That man scared me." My blood ran cold. We were the only two at home. My husband was at work, and my older daughter was at school, so there definitely should not have been any man in my house. When I asked what man, she just kept pointing to the hallway and saying, "That man over there." I grabbed a small wooden bat from a toy bin at the end of our couch and crept into the hallway. There was no one there. I carefully walked around the entire first floor, searching the storage space under our stairs, our laundry room, and our pantry. No one there. No one could have snuck upstairs without me hearing. The old wooden stairs in our home were notoriously creaky, and the door leading to our garage was also very loud. There was no way anyone could have gotten out of the living areas without me hearing them. I was officially freaked out and told my husband about it as soon as the kids went to bed that night. He chalked it up to our daughter's vivid imagination. The second weird occurrence happened a few weeks later. My husband was a soldier in the army, and after physical training in the morning, he would come home to shower and change into his uniform for the day. He was taking a shower in our bathroom when he thought he saw someone walking through our bedroom. Our shower curtain had a clear panel across the top, and he showered with the door open because of poor ventilation in the bathroom. From the doorway of the bathroom, you had a clear view of our bedroom. He said, out of the corner of his eye, he had seen someone walk up next to our bed and bend over our nightstand. But when he asked me about it, I told him I had never come upstairs. He was weirded out, but thought maybe he imagined it. We ended up getting a dog shortly after. Our beautiful bulldog was named Eleanor, and unfortunately, soon after getting her, we learned that our youngest daughter was deathly allergic to her. Because of our daughter's allergies, Eleanor had to stay downstairs, and at night we would kennel her in our dining room. It wasn't long that she began to bark at the hallway, the same hallway my daughter had claimed to see a man that scared her. Eleanor's hair on the back of her neck would stand up, and she would bark at something we couldn't see. At first, we thought maybe it would be mice, despite no other signs that we had them. We set traps and never caught anything. We ended up having to rehome our sweet Eleanor due to my daughter's allergies. But for the entire 2 years we had her, she hated that hallway and would refuse to walk through it. The most terrifying event that ever happened to me when we lived in that house was the night I saw him. I was laying in bed playing on my phone while my husband slept beside me. It was around 1 a.m, and I decided I needed to try to get some sleep, since I'd have to get my oldest up for school the following morning. I'd been facing our bathroom and the door to our bedroom. I rolled over to snuggle up to my husband, and standing in the corner of our room was a soldier in full uniform. The room was dark, but because of a street lamp right outside the window, he was illuminated well. I screamed and smacked my husband to wake up, and as soon as my husband jumped, the soldier took one step toward the bed and disappeared into thin air. I was hysterical. My husband told me I had to have been dreaming, but I had never been to sleep, and I knew what I saw. He had been so solid I would have sworn he was a real person, until he faded away right before my eyes. I was terrified, and it took me forever to fall asleep. The next day, I talked to a friend of mine who had lived on our street for a few years. At first, I simply asked if she had ever heard of anyone else on post complaining about their house being haunted. She said yes, and asked why. I didn't tell her what I saw, but I did tell her that weird stuff had been happening in our house. She immediately got uncomfortable and said, "Well, you know a guy that used to live on our street killed himself in his house, right?" I was shocked. I said no, and asked her when it happened. She explained that when she and her husband first moved in, they used to have block parties in the cul-de-sac at the end of our street. Shortly after they moved in, they went to a block party to meet the neighbours, and someone at the party told them it was a good thing that they hadn't moved in a few months earlier, because one of the neighbours had committed suicide after returning home from war. They said he had suffered from PTSD and shot himself one night. With it being a military post, it had really shaken up the whole neighbourhood. My friend wasn't sure exactly which house it happened in, but judging from what we had all seen and experienced in my house, I was sure it was mine. We had tons of other experiences in that house. We lived there for 6 of the 8 years we lived at Fort Campbell. There was always something weird or unexplainable happening there. I share a room with my grandma, and I'm not sleeping there because she's sick. That's why I was sleeping on our living room sofa. I've slept on that sofa at night lots of times, so I wasn't scared or anything. The actual story is I was on my phone and I had a really bad gut feeling. So I stopped scrolling on my phone and was trying to sleep. After a minute, I heard someone singing a song behind me. It was coming from another sofa that was behind me. It was just for a few seconds, but I got so scared I pretended to be asleep, and I don't know how I managed to stay calm for so long. After 15 minutes, my mum came to get water from the kitchen, and I finally got up and went straight to their room. When I told them, they laughed at me, but of course anyone would laugh. I knew they weren't going to believe me. I know it wasn't my family because Grandma and my brother are asleep upstairs. My parents' room is downstairs, but not near the living room. I know I heard it, but if it was real, then what was it? This house we live in is our ancestral home, but no one ever experienced anything paranormal in the house except for my brother and I. My other experience was a month ago. I was brushing my teeth, then I heard something, and then I saw something sprint past me. First I thought it was my brother, and then I remembered he was still asleep. And also when I told this to my parents, they laughed and didn't believe me. But I think they were trying to convince me that it was just in my head, because they've experienced these things themselves. I don't know about my dad, but my mom was nervously laughing. Me and my roommate just moved to our new apartment. It's been like a month. Since the first few days, weird things started happening. Like I started finding my hat inside the sleeve of my jacket multiple times in the first few days. I never put it there, nor did my roommate. Things started falling and doors opening by themselves. But the house is old and we are moving, so we thought nothing of it. Burned some Palo Santo and thought that was it. Then my girlfriend came to visit, and she told me she woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like something horrible was behind her and watching us sleep. I brushed it off as sleep paralysis, but then I too started to wake up, always around 4 a.m. Always feeling like I've been woken up. My roommate sometimes hears what sounds like pebbles falling on the floor. My roommate too wakes up around the same hours and feels watched. But the thing is, we didn't tell her what happened to my girlfriend, and neither did I about waking up so abruptly in the middle of the night. So we aren't conditioning each other. Then the dreams and smells and bruises started. Sometimes, something in the house smells like pure death. But it obviously is not anything we can find, and the dog doesn't look for it. So it's not like garbage or food, just a smell so foul and rotten. We wake up bruised, pretty badly, in points where we can't have caused it. Not even without realizing, and the bruises on me have become really big through time. And then, they're nightmares. It's since I was a child that I hadn't had dreams that bad. So realistic and lucid, and I always remember them clearly, and it's always something really atrocious. So when I was younger, around the age of 10 years old, we visited for the third time in my life, and the first time I remembered clearly, my grand aunt Eugenia's house in Aegeo, Greece. This time was the first we visited and she wasn't with us anymore. She had passed away. That summer, I remember it very vividly, because I had constant dreams of her visiting me and lighting up the holy candle that was hanging over my bed at night. It was something she used to do when we were visiting, because at the time there was faulty wiring in my room, so we didn't use any of the plugs, and the candlelight also worked as a nightlight, so I wouldn't stumble on any furniture at night when I got up to use the bathroom. Usually after those dreams, I would wake up to find the holy candle lit, or slowly going out since it was morning. That summer was also the first summer I was allowed to explore the neighbourhood, with my 5-year-old sister, but not as far as we would have liked. But one evening, my dad and my aunt Helena had a fight, and when dad gets angry, he leaves and goes for long walks. It's something he does to calm himself down. That evening, I heard the fight and I wanted to console him, so I quickly ran after him. We walked around the neighbourhood in our PJs and flip-flops as we enjoyed the sunset and the sea view we had, as we talked about various things about the night. On our way back home, after my mum called my dad, we passed the house on 39th Constantinopolis Street. I remember it looked so jarringly familiar that I froze before it, and my dad unknowingly kept pulling as we were holding hands. I didn't know why it looked so familiar, so I pushed that memory aside. Years go by and it's 2018, and we're visiting the house again. This time, I've had an anxiety attack that was so bad that Mum suggested I remove myself from the house. Where was the thing that caused me my anxiety, aka my phone and social media? And I listened to her, left my phone, wore my shoes, and I left the house. Just as I was trying to shut the door in my frantic state, Dad stopped me, saying I shouldn't be alone now, so we tagged along. We walked the same route as all those years ago. My anxiety attack slowly faded away, and we sat by a bench enjoying the sunset when I finally calmed down completely. On our way back, I saw the house again, and this time I was sure it looked familiar, because I had seen it in a dream, yet I couldn't pinpoint the dream. I would visit this house many more times during the summer of 2018 and 2019, trying to take my mind to recall the dream. It was summer of 2020 when I was talking on the phone, and since on the street we have better cell phone signals, I was pacing around the neighbourhood when I heard music coming from down the street. Now, keep in mind, this neighbourhood is located above nightclubs, and it was summer. Music is always present, either by the nightclubs or because many of the houses in the area are summer houses, and everyone has windows open. But this music didn't fit in. It sounded like it was coming from a gramophone. While listening to my friend rambling, I started following the music, and the moment I stopped before the house, the music stopped. I jumped when I heard the sound of a glass breaking that came from the balcony of a house next to the one I was staring at. I shook my head, thinking again that it came from a different house, and the sound just spread out. Summer 2021, I'm walking down the same path with my dad, as a leisure walk this time, and we're discussing architecture of the early 20th century, when Dad stops before the very same house, and points out how the house looks old, but the terrace looks relatively new, maybe 1950s. That was when I automatically corrected him, saying that the terrace is older, but the renovation might have been around the 1950s. He looked at me confused, wondering how I knew that, but I just shrugged and pointed lamely that the brick that the whole house was covered in was exactly the same, but the railings were different. If they hadn't stored the bricks to use later, it must have been built all at the same time. Dad gave up after that, saying that I was right, and we kept walking. As we were walking, a small breeze blew and I heard the gramophone music again. That was the moment I remembered the dream. The dream was of me watching some young girls around the early 1900s, walking towards that house, as music from the house was able to be heard all the way down the street. I didn't know who those ladies were, but they were in their late 17 years old with early 20s. I watched them entering the house that looked in very good condition, not as abandoned as I grew up watching it in real life. I remember I followed those girls inside the house, where there was a party happening. That was when I realised the time period. It was a send-off party. The eldest son of the household was going to fight World War I, and all his friends and family threw him a party to say goodbye. They were quite rich, judging by how the house was decorated. I remember watching a couple in that terrace looking at the sky and talking about how fragile life is, and that when the war ends, the man would marry the girl. And the girl told him not to make promises he can't keep, because life is unexpected. After that, I felt myself being pulled back, and I found myself watching the house, and this time I saw my grandma and great-aunt Eugenia standing outside of it holding each other's arms, and I wanted to yell out to them to say hi. And I was there when I realised they couldn't see me. I had nobody. I was just watching everything. Judging by how old my grandma and great-aunt Eugenia were, I would say it was around the early 1950s, and I could see construction happening around the house. My grandma and her sister, they asked what they were fixing to the construction worker, and he answered they were fixing the railings because the granddaughter was bringing her fiancé from Australia, and the wedding would take place in the house. Grandma and her sister commented about how happy they were for the granddaughter to finally settle down, and wished the construction worker good luck before leaving and continuing their stroll. I followed them, but I kept feeling pulled back, and I was screaming for my grandma to hear me. The last thing I've heard was my grandma talking to her sister about the job she took in Pella as a teacher, and was wondering if it was worth it to be this far away from Agio, their hometown. After that, I was pulled back into the house, and it was now abandoned, and I couldn't get out. I was crying and slamming my fists against the main door. Something else scared me after that, because I had jumped up awake and I was crying in my sleep. I have no idea what that was, but after I recalled the dream, I went back and started staring at the house, and wondering why I was watching the dream when I was about 10 years old. I haven't had a dream about that house ever since, but I feel a pull towards that house, and I don't know why, especially the terrace. This happened a few minutes ago. I had just taken out of the oven my freshly baked vanilla and cinnamon raisin cakes, and wanted to snap a photo of them to send to my best friend and my aunt. My camera had the AI option activated, because I forgot to disable it after my outing on Friday night. So, as I turned my camera toward the kitchen table, the AI sign showed 1 second the food sign, since I snapped a picture of the cakes, and the next, when facing the kitchen table and kitchen door, it showed the person again. The person sign appears when the AI features detects a person's presence. The thing is that I was alone. My parents were napping and my sister is in her room studying. My aunt is working at her boyfriend's family farm, trying to finish before sundown, and the rain comes. The house is my mum's and aunt's childhood home, and my grandma lived in it from 1983 up to 2017, where she died in her sleep in her room, aka my parents' current bedroom. All of us have experienced something that might be considered as a presence, either by feeling a hand on our backs, shoulders, or heads, but never on a camera or radio. Although my computer sometimes opens by itself in the middle of the night or day when it's in sleep mode, I don't think that has anything to do with a ghost. I found it odd. Didn't feel a presence, and the person's sign remained for a moment when I placed the camera in the same spot again, a second after I realised what had happened. If there's a ghost after all, I think it's either my grandma or my grandpa, or both of them keeping an eye on us. Maybe they, she, he, wanted to see how the cakes turned out. This happened on Sunday the 16th of January, 2022. The first event happened at 8 PM. I was in the WC of our house. We have a full bathroom and a WC, and I had a coughing fit that was really bad. As I calmed down and I'm trying to catch my breath, I hear my mum's voice coming from the full bathroom, asking me if I'm okay. The bathrooms are connected with a common airway, and we usually use it to speak to one another if it's necessary. Otherwise, it's used as an airway. I say that I'm okay and get out of the WC, and I go to knock at the full bathroom's door to reassure my mum that I'm okay. But nobody was in the bathroom. My mum was in her room on her computer. Confused, I asked mum if she's been to the bathroom for the past 5 minutes, and she said she hadn't. She didn't want to lose any moments of her friend's radio program, so she was keeping her water intake to the minimum. I just shook my head and went on with my afternoon. The second event happened at 6 a.m. I was about to head to bed after spending the entire night writing. I'm more creative at night. And I decided that it was enough writing for tonight and went to brush my teeth and pee before bed. I'm peeing when someone knocks on the door and then I hear my dad's voice asking me if I'm okay. I say yes, and he says, alright, before I hear him enter the kitchen and open the small kitchen light, and I hear him prepare the kettle for his coffee and prepare my sister's breakfast. I look at my phone and it's 6:15 a.m. and I think that Dad might have woken up an hour earlier than usual because he couldn't sleep. He usually wakes up at 7 a.m. and starts waking my sister up for school. It wasn't unusual for my dad to wake up at 6 or 5 a.m. or not sleep at all at night reading comics on his computer, waiting for 7 a.m. So I shrug it off and get on with my thing. But when I finish and I'm shutting the light, I turn to say good morning to my dad. But the kitchen is empty and dark. Dad is nowhere to be seen. I gently go to my parents' room and I can hear my mum's and dad's snores. So I go to my room to sleep. At 7 a.m, I woke up to the sound of my dad's alarm clock, and I got up to ask my dad if he went to the kitchen around 6 a.m. And he said no, but had a dream of getting a glass of water from the kitchen. So my ex-boyfriend and I went our separate ways about 6 years ago because he was a raging alcoholic. And of course, being the weak-willed person I was, I became one too. So I had the opportunity to move a few states away with some friends who would do anything and everything they could to help me get my life back on track. I gave him an ultimatum: stay here, continue drinking and die. Or come with me and let's start fresh and do something with our lives we could be proud of. He chose to stay. He died a month later. I carried around a lot of guilt about it for a long time, especially since my now ex-best friend told me he killed himself over me. Not the case. However, here's where it gets a little weird. He has a twin brother who died of an epileptic seizure in the upstairs bathroom of their house after falling and hitting his head on the sink. My ex-boyfriend died of an epileptic seizure exactly 1 year to the day of the anniversary of his twin brother's death in the same bathroom of the same house by hitting his head on the same sink. And now, the final eerie frosting on top of the eerie cake came today when I was going through my files. And I came upon one file folder, and as I pulled it out of the plastic tub they're kept in, I immediately recognised a familiar handwriting that said, "Josh is speaking to me from beyond the grave." My God, I have the heebie-jeebies right now. So this all happens when I'm half asleep, but definitely still conscious, as I remember what I saw and my responding to it in detail. I mention that because being close to sleep is a bit of a disqualifier for me, since it could be just a dream or my brain being sleepy, so take my experience with a grain of salt. I have this recurring almost dream where a shadow figure, always in the shape of a snake that I would guesstimate to be about 6-ish feet long, approaches my bed while I'm trying to sleep. More specifically, it keeps trying to get around me to where my girlfriend is asleep. It will vanish without fail if confronted, which is where my girlfriend comes in. She's woken up to me telling various spots in the room off. She describes it like I'm commanding a pet. One time she was awake and watched me calmly set up and fling my pillow at something. I remember every interaction, and it always goes just how she describes it. So unlike classic sleepwalking. I'm posting because last night we were house sitting for my parents. And I had another experience. Pretty uneventful. I just glared at it and said, "Don't you fucking try." And she said it was probably a bit more intimidating than I intended. But this morning she made the comment that it's weird, that this only happens at my parents' house and only when we stay in this one specific guest room. It's never happened anywhere else, including other rooms in the same house, which made me wonder what could be causing this interaction. So a while ago, I responded to what I think to be a poltergeist. I responded to a house in a rather okay neighbourhood. Houses were well taken care of despite being mostly built in the early 80s. Most, if not all, two-story homes. Early in the morning, dispatch notified me of a possible home invasion or robbery at one of the houses by an anonymous tip from a supposed concerned neighbour. The following are details that I jotted down in my patrol book shortly after the incident. Date 24th of January 2022. Dispatch notified by concerned neighbour at 0217 hours of light and sounds coming from a home whose occupants are known to be on vacation. First unit on the scene, me, at 0224, with unit call sign Charlie 2, shift sergeant, arriving approximately 2 minutes later at 0226. Upon initial inspection of the home, no evidence of forced entry on either front and back doors, which were locked. First story windows appear to be secured. Residence is a two-story dwelling with a single light on upstairs. Upon dispatch making contact with the homeowners, we were advised of a spare key hidden in a fake rock, located near the main steps under a small bush in front of the house. Decision was made to make entry, 0230. 2 more units arrived, Charlie 4 and Charlie 9. Entry of the house, weapons drawn. 2-man teams were utilised to clear the house. Upon initial inspection, the main foyer was clear, with no evidence of tampering. Dining room and den/living room was also clear, with no evidence of tampering. Kitchen and laundry room showed evidence of tampering, with various drawers and cabinets open. Freezer door was ajar and several items spilled out. Several knives from the knife block appeared missing or strewn about the floor of the kitchen. Laundry room light was on, and laundry detergent was deposited on the floor. Several items of clothing were torn and strewn on the floor. Door was slightly damaged along with the drywall where the doorknob struck it. Upstairs hall light was on. 2 out of 3 doors were ajar, with one room that had its light on. Upon entering the room with the door open with the light on, appears to be the master bedroom. Bed was not made, with pillows thrown about. Blankets and sheets were balled up at the foot of the bed. Master bathroom light was also on, with a large mirror that appeared to be shattered. Several articles of clothing which were ripped similar to the ones in the laundry room were thrown about. Some on the floor, some in the bathtub, and some in the sink and the 2 sink vanity shards of mirror all over the floor and bathtub. The last 2 rooms were searched and deemed cleared. Room 2, which was also open, had several items tampered with. The doorknob appeared damaged. The bed was unmade and sheets and blankets were balled up at the foot of the bed, similar to the master bedroom. Room 3, door was closed, had no evidence of tampering. Upon rallying in the main foyer of the first floor of the house, several large bangs and what was perceived as heavy footfalls appeared to be coming from upstairs. I, Charlie 2 and Charlie 9 made our way back upstairs where the master bedroom door was again ajar. All upstairs bedroom doors were closed before going back downstairs. A lone picture laid on the entrance to the master bedroom, which appeared to have 2 large burned holes through the faces of both people in the picture. Master bedroom had several pictures removed from the wall and placed on the ottoman at the foot of the bed. All pictures were damaged to include broken glass, bent and warped frames. Several shoes were also removed from the closet and placed on the nightstand, and the lamp was knocked over. Upstairs was again swept and no other anomalies were discovered. All upstairs windows were locked and secured. All lights were subsequently turned off and all doors were secured and locked. Upon exit of the house, dispatch was notified no persons were found inside the house and the house was again secured. However, damages were observed in several rooms. Decision was made to patrol the street and surrounding neighbourhood. I and Charlie 9 remained in the area on patrol. All units departed at 0410. Approximately 0422, Charlie 9 drove past the house, and all lights, including exterior lights, were on. Glow from the inside of the house, where the den/living room was located, appeared that the TV was on. Dispatch was notified, and I arrived on scene again approximately 0424. Entry was again made of the house. Several appliances, including the gas stove, was on, all 5 burners, microwave and garbage disposal. TV was on with full volume. Dryer was running along with the washing machine, and a radio could be heard playing at full volume upstairs. First floor was again cleared. Upon clearing the last room, the laundry room, heavy footfalls along with sounds of grunting and dog-like growling could be heard from upstairs. No dog was present who observed the first time we entered. Our presence was announced, and we made our way up the stairs, again weapons drawn. Sounds were emitting from the master bedroom, and orders to step out with hands held up in plain view was demanded. These orders were announced several times, all the while sounds of growling and murmuring was heard. Upon entry to the master bedroom, the nightstands were now upside down on the master bed. All drawers from the dressers were open, and clothing articles were strewn about. All noises, including appliances, stopped once we made entry into the master bath. All lights, including the master bath lights, were turned off, without us doing so. Upon exiting the master bedroom, going down the stairs and exiting the front door of the house, we notified dispatch of our findings and concluded that we will no longer be entering the premises. Charlie 1 shift lieutenant and Charlie 2 arrived on scene to document the findings at approximately 0500. Pictures were taken of the scene to include the damages observed before being forcibly pushed by an unknown entity. Charlie 2 sustained minor abrasions on left forearm and minor laceration behind right ear from being knocked over. No further personnel permitted on premises until the arrival of homeowners. All pictures and reports were given to investigations for further follow-up. The village I lived in was only about 40 to 50 people at most. Everyone knew everyone. All 12 of us kids knew each other and played with each other. Naturally, some of us grouped together and explored the surrounding area, since there wasn't much in the way of entertainment back then, mid to late 90s, in rural Ohio. The village was old. The furthest back I could find about the village documentation-wise was that it was established back in the late 1790s as a small trading hub for the local area. Ohio didn't become a state until 1803. My village had a single church in the centre of it, an old schoolhouse converted into an actual house just next to it, and pasture behind it with thick woods surrounding 3 of the 4 sides of the small town. Again, as said prior, my dad grew up around the area, so he was full of legends and stories about the area. One of those stories was about a small fort that was originally French, turned British, and finally colonial America in the area. Nobody really knew where exactly it was located, but there were a few mentions of a small fort in the area from the research I did. One of the stories about this fort was that it was a primary trade route for the local native tribes, and the influx of settlers that were arriving in the area. Naturally, conflicts arose as more and more people settled the surrounding area, and eventually all-out conflict ensued between the settlers and the native tribes. The fort was said to be destroyed by fire. People on both sides slaughtered each other, and eventually the natives were driven from the area with the help of a local militia. My dad always told me the land wasn't good, tainted in ways with bad energy. I guess when entire families are slaughtered and people being driven from their homeland, it can cause some long-term ill effects. When all of us kids were playing, we were always told 2 things. 1. If the woods get quiet, you get quiet and leave immediately. 2. If your name is being called out on your way out in the woods, do not respond. Go home immediately and never look back. Pretend you never heard it to begin with. Everyone in the village knew how quirky the area was. Most days were the usual bland days, while some days it was like a fairy tale. Periodically other days, it could be a nightmare. Now, the people of the woods were probably the most common entity everyone in the village knew of, and were generally treated with respect and a wide berth. Some of the other things were generally best left well enough alone entirely. In the late 90s, I was around 9 years old, when I was overcome with an insatiable desire to go camping. It was mid-August, so hot and muggy during the day, but rather mild and cool at night. I gathered two of my friends and told them about it, and they both liked the idea. Now, generally, nobody really camped in our woods. My parents, along with many others, really didn't like the idea of a group of 10 and 11-year-olds going out camping alone. My dad said we could as long as he came with us, just to ensure we were safe. I reluctantly agreed. Prior to that night, I went out to scout out a good area to make camp at, and I knew of a fairly decent place that was close to the creek, relatively flat and not too difficult to get to. I wanted to scout the area just to ensure it was cleared of debris and ready for tents. By this time, I was well acquainted with the people of the woods, and I made my offering before entering the woods. I didn't see them while on my journey or anything, so I felt pretty good about that. Once I arrived at the location, I began moving things around, clearing out the sticks, large stones, and making a fire pit. Even going as far as stocking it with wood and throwing some larger sticks nearby for fuel for later. I was so enthralled in what I was doing and so focused on getting the area cleared that by the time I was satisfied with what I had done, I just noticed just how quiet everything around me became. When I say quiet, I mean dead silent. No birds, bugs, not even the wind made a noise amongst the leaf litter. I immediately shut down everything I was doing. I stood there looking around, slowing my breathing and just trying to listen for the faintest sound I could. I don't know how long I stood there motionless. A few minutes maybe, and then in the far distance I could hear a crow call. And almost immediately, I began hearing the chirping of robins, and even a faint whistling from the wind in the trees. The hair on my arms and neck were on end, and I figured, well, maybe it was just me making a ruckus, that everything nearby quieted down because of that. Content with that logical reasoning, I began making my way back home to pack up for the night. Around 6 p.m. that night, my two friends made their way over with backpacks, tents, and both me and my dad were finishing up dinner. All four of us made ready with everything we needed, and began trekking out to the site I prepared. Nothing all that noteworthy happened going to the site, even after setting up our tents, lighting the fire and making s'mores. It was shaping up to be a pretty fun night and rather enjoyable. Once we started to get ready to crawl into our tents for the night, around 10 or 11 p.m., the wind started to pick up, and my dad said we might be in for some rain, but he didn't seem to have a look of contentment. My dad loved rain, on his face when he said it. It was like he felt something was off, and it wasn't long that all of us started to feel that way. We all ended up crawling in our tents anyway since it was night, and possible rain incoming, trekking back home would have sucked. We should have walked back. We situated our tents in a half circle around the fire pit, which were all facing the creek, and the back of the tents facing the wood line. My dad was to the left of me in his military surplus tent, me in my cheapo Walmart single-person tent, just barely large enough for me, and my two friends to my right in their own tents. The wind howled for some time, half an hour to an hour before it calmed down. Then it got quiet. No crickets, no wind, no wildlife. The creek itself, which usually bubbles happily along, sounded muted. All we had was the faint glow of embers from the fire pit in front of our tents, casting a warm glow. I could hear my heart throb in my ears, and I knew my dad and two friends were just as anxious as I was, as I could hear them shift uncomfortably. I heard one of my friend's tent zipper, and naturally I undid my zipper too, to see what was going on. As soon as I popped my head out to look, I saw my dad come out of his tent with the machete he had, and he faced the wood line. My friend had his head poking out too, and asked if I heard that noise. I didn't hear anything. My heart was pounding so hard, it was hard hearing him even whisper. We both partially got out of the tent to see what my dad was looking at, but all we could see was inky darkness. And then I heard it, a distant and faint hello. It was coming from some ways away in the darkness of the woods. I could see my dad shift uncomfortably on his feet, white-knuckling his machete, looking into the wood line. Then again, the voice called out again. Hello? It didn't seem right. Off-putting.
almost as if whoever was speaking was trying to speak in a very feminine voice, faint and fragile. My dad motioned me to grab some of the extra wood next to his tent and throw it on the fire, which I reluctantly did. Leaving the perceived safety of my tent didn't sit well with me. As the fire began to slowly grow in brightness, my dad stepped backwards near the fire and stood there facing the wood line. By this time, my other friend popped his head out of his tent too, and all three of us, including my dad, were watching the wood line, unsure what to expect. Nothing came out, and we didn't hear the voice again. An hour passed, and by this time, my dad was sitting on a large stone next to his tent, one leg crossed and a machete in his right hand, watching silently. Only the sound of crackling fire echoing against the shale cliff face across the creek. Several hours passed, and both of my friends went back into their tents. Only me and my dad were out. Me tending the fire, and my dad watching and waiting. I could hear rustling to our right, just beyond the light from the fire in the tree line. My friend closest to it popped his head out, looked at me, and asked me, "What?" as if he was wanting me to repeat what I said. I didn't say a word, hadn't said a word since I came out of my tent the first time. I put my finger up to my lips and motioned to be quiet. By the time I did so, my dad was standing next to me and told us both to shush, and immediately we heard someone say, "Come here," in the same off-putting feminine voice as earlier. All three of us just stood there, peering in the direction of where the voice came from, and shortly after, we heard what sounded like something moving back deeper into the woods. It didn't sound heavy. It sounded light, like something lightly trotting back into the woods. That was the last time we heard it. Shortly after, I'm assuming early morning, just before daybreak, the wood life returned. Crickets, the distant chirp of birds, and the whisper from the wind through the leaves. Once daybreak came, we all broke down our tents, packed up, and began hiking back home. We were paranoid the entire way back, stopping, listening, looking. We didn't see or hear anything or anyone. Nobody said a word on the way back. Once we made it to my backyard, my dad broke the silence and told us what we had experienced never happened, and it would do us good not to say a word to anyone about it. He had fear written all over his face, as if not even he had experienced something like that. To this day, I don't know what it was or who it was. I did end up asking my aunt next door later in life if she experienced something similar, since she grew up in the area too, but even she was tight-lipped about it, saying we shouldn't have gone camping out there, and my dad was a fool for letting us go. I've since left my village and moved out of state, and I've run into similar stories down here in the southeast, with the same reluctance to explain what it was or could be.